and welcome to our Bible study for December as we work our way through Advent towards Christmas. And so I thought we'd have a look at a story which I think is particularly relevant and important for our Christmas reflections, but again is one that you might not have had chance to read before, or certainly not in depth. I think we've enjoyed in these Bible studies looking at passages of the Bible which we might not have visited before, as well as some which are more familiar and we've had a chance to look at again. So through December we will be looking at the book of Ruth, which is a very short book in the Old Testament. You'll find it after the books of the Judges and before the books of Samuel and Kings. So it's part of that long sort of historical narrative which forms the early part of the Old Testament, telling the history of the people of Israel. Ruth is only a short book, 4 chapters long, but I'll still record 3 videos, but probably only short videos, as we take some time in this busy festive season for some Bible study. So why the book of Ruth at Christmas? Well, if you look at the Gospel of Matthew and his genealogy with which he begins the Gospel, you'll notice that amongst the long list of men, of fathers, tracing Jesus' descendancy from Adam through Abraham, David, and the many other steps in that family tree, you'll notice a few women's names. Tamar, we'll refer to her towards the end of this Bible study. Ruth, Uriah is also in there, and Mary, mother of Jesus. So Ruth is one of the very few women mentioned in that genealogy at the start of Matthew's Gospel, with which he introduces the infancy narrative, the narrative of the birth of Jesus. So there must be a reason why he chose to include these 4 female names as well as the list of fathers of men. And I think if we go to the book of Ruth, if we look at Ruth's story, we might be able to understand a little bit of why they are in there and what relevance they have to the birth of Jesus. Ruth also gets a shout out in the Christmas proclamation. So there's the proclamation of the birth of Jesus, which is sometimes read on Christmas Day. I've read it before at midnight mass. It is a lovely thing to do, which announces the birth of Jesus by placing it in historical time. It dates the birth of Jesus according to various different dating systems that might be in use. And one of the ways that it's dated is by saying the birth of Jesus happened 1100 years from the time of Ruth and the Judges, and 1000 years from the time as that David was anointed king. So Ruth seems to have found her place in Israelite history and therefore in Christian history for one reason or another. So I do encourage you to have a look at the book of Ruth, and we'll have a look at what it has to offer us. So Ruth 1:1 locates us in the time of the Judges. The previous book of the Bible has been all about the Judges and their rule over Israel. And at the end of the book of Judges, the people ask not for judges but for a king. And so Ruth is sort of located in that in-between times as the nation of Israel is transitioning towards a monarchy. But the book of Ruth doesn't start with Ruth herself, and I think that's quite important. Ruth is an outsider to this story. No, the book of Ruth instead starts in Bethlehem. Again, you'll already see the birth connections, Christmas connections here. Begins in Bethlehem of Judah with a man called Elimelech. It's not really his story, but the story starts with him. He has a wife, Naomi, and children, Mahlon and Chilion. Now, there's an irony here because the name Bethlehem means house of bread. So I think there's already a pun here, some irony going on, that there's a famine in the land and a man of Bethlehem has no bread. So he leaves Bethlehem, he leaves Judah for Moab. Moab is a neighbouring country which at this point was constantly at war, at rivalry with Israel. But more than that, Moab's history is that Moab was a son of Lot. You may remember Abraham and Lot were brothers, but Lot lost favour with God, and he had children by incest with his daughters Ammon and Moab. So throughout the historical books of the Bible, those two nations are cast as direct rivals, direct antagonists to Israel because of their godlessness, because of their wayward ways, turning their back on the Lord God. And more than that, Israelites are forbidden from taking a foreign wife, but Moabites and Ammonites are specifically excluded. There seems to be some desire within the laws of Israel to make sure that there's no confusion, there's no contamination. Remember, the laws and rules of laws and customs of Israel are all about purity. By introducing people from Moab or Ammon into the Israelite race, they share some cultural and genetic heritage. So I think with those closest to you, you have to show the greatest sort of differentiation, be the most careful about drawing those boundaries, and that's what the nation of Israel did. So when it says 1:4 that Elimelech's children took Moabite wives, that was forbidden for Israelites. They are themselves sort of ruling themselves out of Israelite society, or being able to return, being able to take part in Israelite society again. So that paints Elimelech and his children as outsiders, and it just serves to emphasise how much of an outsider Ruth is, and that she should have no part in the life of Israel. She should have no stake in the cultural, social, or spiritual life of Israel. But we'll see that will be challenged, and I think that sets the scene for the book of Ruth as this book of how does a complete outsider become someone with a stake, with an inheritance in the people of Israel. And when we're thinking about the parallels with Christmas, I think that's exactly the message that I want to take from this, that the birth of Jesus Christ is an explanation for how that we, as complete outsiders who have turned our back on God through our sinfulness, through those ways that our relationships with God have broken down, how is it that we end up with this stake, with this inheritance from God as God's children, even though we ought by rights have no stake, have no part in his life and his love. And how do we get that? Well, it has to be given as an unconditional gift. That's what the book of Ruth will help us understand as well. So when Mahlon and Chilion die, as well as their father Elimelech, and both Naomi and her daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, are left without anyone to keep them, they look to return to Judah as outsiders, but there's this wonderful sort of cautiousness as they do. Usually, these journeys in the Bible, they made their way from A to B and they settled there. But at Ruth 1:6, they started to return from the country of Moab. Um, there's this cautiousness about it, which I think is a wonderful sort of part of the storytelling here. And why have they gone? Because they've heard that the Lord had consideration for his people and given them food. That's Ruth 1:6. So they've identified that the Lord is God, which in the Moabite custom, the Moabite religion, is not the case. They have their own God. So I think that's something to note, that both Naomi and her daughters-in-law acknowledge that the Lord is God and has had consideration for his people. So Naomi, at least, is still counting herself as one of his people, even though, as we've said, they've taken these social steps to exclude themselves and given them food, which, of course, was the reason why they left in the first place, that God or the land had not provided them with food. So they return, and we get this narrative of them going back, but Orpah and Ruth, are they going to go with Naomi? Orpah in the end decides not to, but Ruth clings to her. And by the end of this passage, we get this song from Ruth, and the Old Testament is full of songs that women sing, which are always important, and that should always sort of foreshadow the song that Mary sings at the beginning of Luke's Gospel, the Magnificat, which always looks back to these various songs. So Ruth sings a song, and a song is always an act of worship in the Old Testament. Beginning 1:16, do not press me to leave you or turn back from following you. And she says, your people shall be my people, and your God my God. So Ruth is acknowledging the Lord as her God, and trying to declare that she should be considered one of his people, one of the Israelite people as well, despite, as we said, the fact that she is a complete outsider. When I read that, I'm also put in mind of doubting Thomas, my Lord and my God. Various moments in the New Testament, we have that declaration of the apostles in particular, recognising that relationship with God that is at the heart of our faith. So while we are talking about concepts like redemption and like adoption, fundamentally we're talking about a relationship where we can say God is my God, and we are his people. And we shouldn't forget that at the heart of that faith, our faith, those relationships are key. Particularly in the light of recent conversations about safeguarding, particularly our relationships with the most vulnerable and with those who consider themselves outsiders, and who otherwise ought to have no stake, no share in the life of the society. Yet we recognise that by God's love, everybody is invited to share in that, and we ought to respond to that appropriately and sensitively. Naomi tries to change her name with those who remember her from Bethlehem. So she says, don't call me Naomi any longer, but call me Mara. In the Old Testament, Hebrew names almost always mean something, and Naomi means pleasant, Mara means bitter. So she's saying, don't call me pleasant any longer, because I don't feel that that's been my lot in life, but call me bitter instead. And that's usually an act of humility, that name changing. to say that my personal experience has so fundamentally changed, those relationships have so fundamentally changed, that actually I want to change my identity, my name, to reflect that. And her song, what she says, again, I think has echoes of the Magnificat, or the Magnificat reverses what Naomi sings. So Naomi says, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. The Magnificat says, the Lord shall send the rich empty away. So these songs that women sing, Naomi and Ruth, have echoes later on in the Song of Mary, the Magnificat, which is a wonderful act of continuity. And I think we see just how much influence that this little book of Ruth has on the infancy narratives, in particular in the New Testament. So that set the scene for the book of Ruth and introduced some of the reasons why I think it's particularly relevant for Advent and Christmas. And in the next study, we'll look at chapters 2 and 3 and exactly what happens to Ruth and to the people that she finds back in Bethlehem. So we'll see you next time.